Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another section of Music 1300. I am, of course, Professor George. We are starting on a new unit today. I am so excited. The culmination of everything has kind of led us here, and what we're going to be talking about today is something called musical arts and kind of special topics. So this is the sort of time in the semester where we're going to talk about like how the arts integrate with one another, and also use that as an excuse to kind of combine all of the different terms that we've been working on defining throughout the entire semester in our unit on texture, our unit on rhythm and meter, our unit on timbre, and our unit on harmony. In addition to our unit on form too, and talking a little bit about dynamics. So everything we're going to be talking about, we've sort of talked about in concentrated selections over the semester, sort of accumulating terms, but this is where everything kind of meets together. So very exciting stuff. The greatest meeting place of all of the arts, as far as I'm concerned, is music for the stage and music that incorporates an extra narrative element. So for me and my quote unquote classical music upbringing, I really enjoy opera. Opera is the meeting place of so many different art forms. Typically, well, just to sort of backtrack, opera, when you look it up in the dictionary, is a very large blanket term. It literally means a work. In our understanding of opera, we typically think of it as a really strong collaboration that happens between the composer and the librettist. Occasionally, that person is the same person. Other times, and in my humble opinion, more successful operas are when that relationship is divided and you have two people creating the overall vision for the piece. There are so many other people that are involved past those who are the creators of the work in terms of the content. When we're thinking about production, we're incorporating many other visual artists, from set design to costume design to choreography to stage direction. All of these things come into music for theater, and in this case, I'm talking about opera. Opera is slightly different than music theater or a musical. We'll talk a bunch about just the history of Broadway and the musical in another lecture. But the main distinction is actually the presence of spoken text versus sung text, or like sung-spoken text. Before I get too interested and continuing to go on my topic, I should point out that today's lecture notes, they're in Dropbox for you. They're a little bit differently formatted than the last ones that I gave for you. There's no listening log in this case, but I do talk about each of the pieces in great detail. So we're going to kind of take a survey today of what I call tragic endings. There's a lot of opera that has been written from the Baroque era on. So I had to be incredibly selective in what I was going to show you today. Also because opera is a very long format structure. So a lot of the musical examples will, while incredibly narrative and very illustrative, will take a little bit more time than some of our instrumental only examples. In any event, we're going to start at the Baroque era. We're going to talk about a work by Henry Purcell called Dido and Aeneas. We're going to talk about Mozart from the classical era. I'm going to kind of take you through some of the greats of opera. We're going to spend a good amount of time in the Romantic era, talk about 3 different pieces, 2 by Italian composers, one by Verdi, the other one by Puccini, from kind of different sections of the Romantic era. We're also going to talk about Bizet, who's a French composer, and his very iconic opera Carmen, and kind of tie our conversation off with the 20th century, talking about Bela Bartok's Bluebeard's Castle. We've already actually talked about one other opera before this point, and that was a part of the 20th century atonality presentation, where we talked about Alban Berg's operatic presentation, voudrais, very chilling piece of music. So, in any event, we're going to survey all of what I call tragic endings, things that go not so well in opera, through those different composers that I listed, starting in the Baroque era. Okay, so again, talking about the distinction between opera and a musical. Opera tends to, and it doesn't have to be exclusively this way, but generally the main distinction between a musical and an opera is the inclusion of what we call recitative, or recit for short. Recitative is something where we're dramatically declaiming the text. And what's important there is that we're pushing the plot forward. Typically, recitative is text that's sung spoken, kind of like Sprechstimme that we covered in Arnold Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire, but it doesn't include repetition. It's really meant to be like a motivated plot pushing forward device. In contrast, we have moments in opera that are fully sung. They often include lyrics that repeat. There's an internal structure of their own. And they're kind of about ruminations, or like larger themes that are a part of the opera typically. Thinking about like popular music that you listen to, those are songs. It sounds fairly basic, but they tend to be about emotional content, not so much about creating a narrative. There can be like narrative elements of it, but it's mostly tying into like a larger idea. Beyond that, there's also structure, like repetition of those ideas in order to create kind of importance for us. So recitative in opera, where we're sort of speaking, are the points in a musical where you would just be speaking the dialogue, just as a heads up. So what does this mean? This means that at least in the Baroque era, there was a very strong distinction between recitative moments and song structure moments. This created a very jarring back, forth kind of feel to the piece of music, which eventually composers tried to work around, creative ways of kind of integrating song into recitative and vice versa. So early on in the Baroque era, which is where we're going to start, we're going to hear a lot of sort of distinction between these musical moments that are supposed to be about larger ideas, and then the sort of recitative moments that separate these more structured songs. Thinking a little bit about the form of an opera and where it comes from. The form of an opera typically is something that's similarly structured to a play. An opera usually comes in an act or multiple acts that are then further divided into scenes. And these scenes, I'm sure you guys have all read Shakespeare for your high school history classes. You recall, hopefully, that like, Shakespeare, like Macbeth, for example, or A Midsummer's Night's Dream, each act further divided out into scenes. Each scene kind of has like an internal working of its own, a kind of structure, a way of navigating the energy and the arc through the scene. Like a scene is satisfying by itself, but otherwise, like, multiple scenes together create an other arching narrative of the form of a act. Those acts then also create a larger form of the opera. So we have kind of like sonata allegro form, these nested ideas of forms and structures, which make opera really, really, really interesting to listen to. In any event, opera, especially in the Baroque era, was really different region by region. French opera really put a stress on dance and choreography. England came up with this thing called the masque, which kind of combined instrumental poetry and like dramatic speakings of text into kind of like a almost variety kind of show. So it had a kind of loose narrative to it, but these were the kind of beginnings of opera. Opera initially, though, was really an art form that was only enjoyed by the very, very wealthy and the very, very rich. Towards the end of the Baroque era and into the classical era, we do have like the emergence of a public opera house, and that's a big to-do. But still, again, like unless you were, you know, of particular social status, you weren't going to get to see a piece of art live. Again, that starts to change into the classical and then into the Romantic era, most certainly, as like Romantic era opera. You think about popular music, that was Romantic era opera, believe it or not. Okay, there's a lot of terms that I threw out at you that kind of covers, for the most part, the first page. Make sure to review some of those terms from my notes. I went through them a little quickly. Probably the last thing I want to mention, maybe before talking about the listening examples, is that opera kind of waxed and waned in terms of its popularity. When was opera the most popular? The Romantic era. This definitely makes sense. We've talked a lot about the Romantic era. Romantic era tone poems and program symphonies are by far like the most popular sort of elements of instrumental music at this time. And why? It had a narrative element to it. It was very, very exciting to listen to. So the extension of that is actually painting the narrative for everyone to see, which made opera very, very exciting and also hugely popular. Of the romantic, of the operas that are most commonly performed in like the major opera houses, the majority of them come from the Romantic era, particularly operas by Puccini and Verdi. Two really big names from the Romantic era. Also, like Mozart definitely comes up again and again. He was very forward thinking. We're going to check out his piece Don Giovanni, which by far is my favorite of all of his operas. In fact, we're going to go through a number of my my all-time favorites today. Surprising or not surprising, they all end rather terribly for at least one character or another. Before I stop this listening or this section of our video, let's go ahead and listen to one of our selections. I'll continue integrating the terms that they covered in this first part as we go through the listening examples, but let's listen to Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. There's an opera company that put together the cheat, the sort of synopsis of Vodsec. We're going to revisit them. They have one for Dido and Aeneas. Reason being, it's really important to be able to kind of talk about the section that we're going to listen to in the larger arc of the entire performance. And of course, Tragic Endings is the name of our presentation today and our lecture topic. So we're mostly going to be covering the endings of these operas in their totalities if we can. So without further ado, let me pull you over to my other screen and play you the synopsis of Henry Purcell's Dido and Aeneas. I'll also mention that this is in English, believe it or not. You're going to notice that it's going to be a little difficult to hear and understand the lyrics when we pass over to the listening example, but it is indeed in English. We'll talk about why it's hard to understand after the listening example. First, the synopsis. All right, here we go.
The story begins with Queen Dido confiding in her servant Belinda.
Belinda? Oh, nothing. I just have this huge crush on Aeneas. But I'm afraid he'll leave me to go found Rome.
That's silly. I'm sure it'll just be fine. Look, here comes your prince now. Go pursue him. Go pursue him. Go. You can do it. Pursue.
Elsewhere, an evil sorceress is hatching a scheme to destroy Dido.
Man, I really hate that Dido. I need to destroy her. Can you go tell Aeneas that Jupiter sent you? And that he needs to go found Rome? That way she'll be so upset it'll be her undoing.
Well, yeah, I can, but do you think it'll work?
Duh, obviously.
While on a picnic, Dido and Aeneas enjoy some light entertainment.
Whoa, behold, babe, yonder play. They totally beheaded that dude. Oh, Dido, babe, you're so awesome. I'd never leave you. Not even to go found Rome.
Oh, Aeneas, you're so romantic. Oh, look, it's raining. Let's go back to town.
Hey, Miss! Oh, wait, just a second.
Yo, bro, it's me, like Mercury or whatever. Jupiter sent me to tell you to go found Rome.
Oh, wait, man. I totally just told my girlfriend that I'd kind of never leave her.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Dido doesn't react well to the news that Aeneas is planning on leaving her.
Fine!
Babe.
Go found
Hey,
Rome!
come on,
Leave
if I
me!
don't need to be so upset,
See if
I
I
totally
care!
would've said that
You're
I'd
just
go
like every typical man!
Found Rome.
Leaving me to go found Rome!
Please, come on.
I hate you! I hate you!
Babe.
Fine! Get away from me!
Jeez.
Get away from me!
Fine, babe.
We're gonna watch this part.
Belinda! Your hand! Belinda! Your hand! Belinda!
Right, I'm here.
I need you to look at me right now. When I die, don't blame yourself. Good. Because I'm going to kill myself right now. Remember me. Remember me. Forget the whole suicide thing. But remember me. Remember me. Forget the whole suicide thing. But remember me.
Okay, and that is the plot of Dido and Aeneas. So, Dido is so upset that Aeneas ends up leaving, that she commits suicide at the very end. It is very, very drawn out, very dramatic. So, in light of our theme being tragic endings, we're going to listen to the very end of Dido and Aeneas, her lament that happens. Again, it's in English, but stylistically, this is from the Baroque era. What does that mean? That means that ornamentation was all the rage. You have a lot of what we call melismatic phrases, where you have multiple notes that are assigned to one word. The opposite of melismatic is syllabic setting, where you have like one syllable per actual note that you're using. One is a lot easier to understand. Syllabic it has a lot of clarity to it. Melismatic or melismatic phrasing, where you have like one word, like where would you hear melismatic phrasing currently? Artists like Whitney Houston or like Mariah Carey, where they're like kind of doing vocalese on like a note, like, or a word rather, like love, like they're doing some kind of ridiculous decoration of that particular word, where they're having more than one pitch to it. That is melisma. It's very dramatic. It does, though, obscure the meaning of the actual word that we're listening to. All right, so you're going to notice, like, it's in English. Well, you hopefully will notice that it's in English, but the big difference here is that, like, because of the ornamentation, these melismatic phrases that are being used, it's a lot harder to understand exactly what she is singing. In any event, we know that she's committed suicide. You'll see like our transition into the scene. Lots of repetition of the same lyrics over and over again. So we know that this isn't recitative, but this is an aria. It's a moment for a solo singer to sing about her emotions on stage and not push the plot really whatsoever. If we were pushing the plot, we would have covered like suicide and done. But we are lamenting right now and really laboring what has happened. All right, let me pull up the listening example for you. All right, here we go. Dido's lament at the very end of Dido and Aeneas. it's kind of like this interesting introduction to what we're about. We know that was rested because of how sparsely it was included. There's a true aria. No trouble in my breast. When I am late. Again, repetition. Melismatic phrasing. Notice that like the intonation here is so much richer than the very introduction of the scene. We also have steady pulse. Metric regularity is something that helps us distinguish recitative from aria textures. That this presentation might just be a lot of me getting off. Music does a lot of speaking on behalf of what's happening on stage, which can be incredibly effective. Like canonic treatment of some of the texts that she's sung by offstage voices. It's really quite chilling. And one of the reasons why the Romantic era ended up being really so very interested in opera is because like it could move people in a way that like it was said that the visual arts couldn't. Perhaps this very ending is a testament to that very idea, and we're going to hear a lot of really exceptional conclusions to operas as well. So that was a little chunk and look into Baroque era opera. When we pick up for our next selection, we're going to talk about classical era opera. We're going to talk about one of my favorites of the entire operatic canon, and that's going to be Mozart's conclusion to Don Giovanni. Very good. So I will see you guys for the next selection.